He has a career that has generated over 500 million in supply chain savings. With over 30 years of functional expertise across, here's the list: procurement, logistics, supply chain, operations. He has worked for companies like Colgate, Mars, and he has a proven model for success. You said it took you 2 years to convince, a gigantic company like Colgate. I wonder, how do you kind of bring up these, transformations, right? Cost saving initiatives, and also deliver that long term value of resilience. How do you convince them? What are some metrics that you look at? Like, it always amazes me the things you guys kind of go through. So I would love to hear a story about how does that happen.
Yeah, so we kind of connecting the two thoughts together there.
This is fascinating. I think I can keep hearing about it all day long because it's something that's new to me, and I'm trying to understand how that works. Because what happens to companies that have like a big portfolio? How do you know which products to kind of target? Because I'm pretty sure Colgate has a lot of different products, right? So how do you know which products to target? How do you know which products to bring up at what time?
Yeah, that's a good question.
This is the first time I think I'm actually hearing in a podcast that you backtracked, because mostly we hear that people look at the future, right? Like, these are the next 3 years or the 5 years. Welcome, everyone, to the Vserve Ebusiness Solution podcast on supply chain management, where we invite some of the industry's great experts to share their experience and gather some helpful tips and tricks along the way. I'm Cynthia, your host, and today we are joined by an exceptional leader in the world of supply chain management. He's a consultant, a board member, and even an interim CEO. He has a career that has generated over 500 million in supply chain savings. With over 30 years of functional expertise across, here's the list: procurement, logistics, supply chain, operations. He has worked for companies like Colgate, Mars, and he has a proven model for success. I'm so happy to finally invite Steve Smiley to our podcast today. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Hi, Cynthia. Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I wanted to add a few more points, but I thought the introduction will take the whole space, so I kind of cut it down short. But you can cover it in the next question, because I love to understand why supply chain, why procurement, and how did you come about in this career?
Yeah, so I'll do it really briefly, but I always had an interest in agriculture, and from a young age, and got to college and got into economics, got a degree in economics, and kind of then figured out a way to combine that with agriculture. So I got a master's in agricultural economics from Florida. And that's what got me into sort of the sourcing, supply chain realm of things. First real job was at Tropicana products in Florida, trading commodities and buying fruit, things like that. So I got in early, and that's really what got me into procurement. Learned a lot of skills in those early years. Then went to Mars and learned even more about commodities and price risk management, things of that nature. And finally got into some kind of straightforward procurement jobs, because I had previously been just hedging. So I kind of went from there to various companies. Was at Mars for 11 years, Colgate-Palmolive, Home Depot Supply, a couple other great companies. Eventually started and ran my own transportation company for 5 years, sold that, and then got into consulting about 10 years ago. So it's been quite the journey, and when I reflect on positively now, looking back on the last 40 years, has been a lot of good things.
And which has been like one of your greatest experience out of all of those different titles that you've held all these years?
Yeah, the time I had at Colgate, working for Hill's Pet Nutrition, was one where I worked for some folks that really had the interest in expanding procurement. And this was back around 2000. And we did some really interesting things there around prices and markets. Today we hear a lot about market price changes, and there's such up-to-date information, but I really see, the opportunity for procurement people to move away from just following markets to more forecasting, and then risk management around the price that they pay for things and the value that they bring. It's one of the things that we started doing at Colgate, which is, there are a couple of different things. Number one, we all pay cash price for things, right?
Yeah.
Whether regardless of the material it is, and not everything's available to hedge on the commodity market.
Yeah.
But if you can create a cash price series, what we developed were some methodologies to be able to use to help forecast cash prices, which is found to be helpful, but also to take it a step further. So if when you're buying in cash, you can either buy forward or you can just buy hand to mouth. There are really only two choices.
Yeah.
And so if you can develop a long-term cash price series, you can actually go in and there are ways to forecast what the cash premium should be. And so as a procurement person, you can figure out what premium should I be paying. And so that premium forecasting on the cash side, I think, is something I don't see people doing as much. That's certainly available with the tools today. So that's one. I think, the other thing that I think more companies could take advantage of is cross-hedging. So we spent a lot of time on that at Colgate. It took me 2 years to convince Colgate to hedge in the commodity markets. But if you can create a relationship between the prices that you're paying and something that's hedged, then you can use commodity markets to manage risk as well. So I think price risk management is something that doesn't get enough play today, that the tools are certainly out there, and certainly the papers have been written about how to do it, that procurement people could certainly learn from and bring value to their businesses doing.
Wow. So you said it took you 2 years to convince, a gigantic company like Colgate. I wonder, like, how do you kind of bring up these, transformations, right? Cost saving initiatives, and also deliver that long-term value, resilience. How do you convince them? What are some metrics that you look at? Like, it always amazes me the things you guys kind of go through. So I would love to hear a story about how does that happen.
Yeah, so we kind of connecting the two thoughts together there. So the idea of commodity cross-hedging also came up there at Colgate. So concept is, we were just negotiating for protein prices, for chicken byproduct prices, and the problem was that we couldn't do anything except not buy or buy forward. And so by connecting our protein to the cross-hedge of protein on Chicago Board of Trade, that allows us to then negotiate with the chicken suppliers only on the processing margin. And so we're able to disintermediate the pricing. And by disintermediate the pricing, then we're able to bring great value to the business because we could do the two pieces separately. You could do the premium negotiation or the tolling agreement, if you will, separate from locking the base price. And we saved a very large amount of money very quickly by disintermediating those two parts of the price.
Yeah.
And so that's probably one of our biggest achievements, or one of my biggest, I think, as I look back and with fond memories of how we did that. And it brought great value. And I think more companies could do that today if they looked at it.
And when we talk about all these transformation and changes, there's always the people that are involved within the whole process. How I would love to hear a story where there's C executive levels, and then there's obviously the management level that has to take the grunt of it. How do you work through the cultural differences and the level differences when bringing in transformations like this?
Yeah, it's quite the challenge, right? So, I made, I think, 9 trips to Colgate to convince their C-suite to allow us to do the hedging piece. Fortunately, I had a good support from my mentor there. But I think, the way that you have to approach those folks is you have to make it real to them. So you have to show them how the benefit to the bottom line is going to hit, because they aren't going to understand all the great detail, all the wonderful stuff that a Steve Smiley can teach them. What they want to know is, okay, well, what does that mean in terms of risk to my company? So what's the risk reward? How do I deal with that piece of it? What's the ROI on doing this? And that's great that you can do this, but if you had done it in the past, and that's what we did, we looked backwards and said, okay, well, if we'd done this in the last 3 years, these are the results that we would have gotten. And then that's what ultimately convinced them, I think, to allow us to do the hedging approach of showing how it would have mitigated some of the price swings and what we paid for products. So we had to back simulate, I guess, is the short answer to what you're saying, Cynthia, at least for the C-suite. And then for the junior people, it was more about skills, advancing skills, right? So, my experience, talents are things that can't be taught, but skills can be taught with the right attitude.
Yep. And this is the first time I think I'm actually hearing in a podcast that you backtracked, because mostly we hear that people look at the future, right? Like, these are the next 3 years or the 5 years. So how does that, is that a study that you did? it's special to you, or is it something that's, operationally within, like, when you're talking about hedge funds and all of those things?
Yeah, I think, in statistical price modeling, I think it's fairly straightforward skill to have people that can go back and pull the historical data and, simulate like a sourcing strategy or a hedging strategy to come up with the results. That's really what we did. That part of it wasn't super complex in my view. The harder part was building the econometric and statistical models that allowed us to do the cross-hedging or allowed us to forecast the cash premiums. That was the harder part. But I think it just showed the executives at Colgate of, hey, look, this is the reality of what it would have looked like. This was the cash flow impact. This was the bottom line impact. And this is the strategy that we want to have going forward.
Wow.
I think one of the other innovations we had at the time was that we created a monthly commodity meeting, right? Which I don't see a lot of companies doing either.
Yeah.
To say what's happening with the major things that we buy, and just
Yeah.
very briefly, we developed like a one-page strategy for each major item and said, here's where we're covered, how far out we're covered, here's what's happening, here's what we're doing. Next page. And
Yeah.
so in a 30-minute C-suite meeting, you could cover 80% of your spend and keep them up to date and bought into your process in a way that prevents them from being surprised, but also shows them the good work that you're doing.
Wow, this is fascinating. I think I can keep hearing about it all day long, because it's something that's new to me, and I'm trying to understand how that works. Because what happens to companies that have like a big portfolio? How do you know which products to kind of target? Because I'm pretty sure Colgate has a lot of different products, right?
Right.
So how do you know which products to target? How do you know which products to bring up at what time?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are generally two approaches. One is kind of a Pareto approach, right? Sort of the 80% of the spend. What we find in most companies is that that doesn't necessarily address the things that are the biggest sources of risk to the business.
Yeah.
So, we want to spend time with people helping to understand what are the things that are most impactful to their bottom line or the highest risk, or, for example, the single source items, right? Because those, if some problem down the line in the supply chain, those are the things to focus on. So we would typically go through some kind of a ranking matrix to figure out not only what's big spend, but where's big risk. Because you can have some things that are very large spend. I've had materials that were over $300 million in spend, but they required almost no effort to buy, and frankly didn't have that much impact. So, and you could have a $10 million spend that's really critical to the business because it's sole sourced from someone maybe overseas or something, and you can't get it. So you really have to go through a multi-tiered evaluation to figure out what are those things that we need to talk about on a regular basis, and what can we just list as other or not don't need to spend time on. And that's a conversation that you have to have with the procurement team.
Wow. Well, that's fascinating. I mean, if I kind of move, I guess, to the logistics piece of it then. So in
Sure.
your experience, which areas of kind of logistic and transportation especially, have the improvement potential when you're doing all these changes?
Yeah, the biggest one we've had the most success with on the consulting basis is just truckload rates, right? That's the most common. That's the one where we can typically bring the most value, the fastest. And that industry is very used to having procurement people approach them with RFPs or whatever it is to go to market to figure out what the best rates are and lock those in for 6 or 12 months, some period of time going forward. So that industry you can typically move pretty fast in. It doesn't take that many weeks to bring quick value. Where you find it takes longer are the ones where you have like long-term distribution agreements and long-term warehousing agreements that are, or sometimes even LTL, where there's very limited opportunities for competition. I think the biggest thing we look for on sourcing transportation or logistics or goods and services is how do we bring optionality to bear, right? So how do we, number one, convince incumbent suppliers that there's some risk that if they really need to be competitive, right, if they haven't been over time, And number two, how do we introduce potential new suppliers, even though they may or may not get the business, to bear on that market, so that the incumbents understand that the business is truly at risk and we're not just bluffing, because bluff is not a sourcing strategy. It can be used as a tactic once in a long while, but generally speaking, it's not a good tactic. So how do we bring optionality to bear? How do we bring in new suppliers? How do we bring in new aggressive suppliers? And even if we don't have to change suppliers necessarily when we're done, but you got to bring that optionality. Otherwise, it's hard to bring value to a sourcing relationship. I think probably the biggest thing we see on consulting is that many companies have been buying from the same people year after year after year without challenging that relationship, and get a little too cozy sometimes, right? It's the company's providing great service, they feel like they're getting a good value, but they've never gone to market to see what else is available, and
Exactly.
I'm sure they're getting good service, right? They wouldn't say that they weren't, but are they getting the best value? That's the question.
Yep, exactly. And you bring up sourcing and stuff like that. There's internal sourcings, there's outsourcing, and in terms of partnership, especially for back office processes, right? Like procurement, planning, there's vendor support, there's catalog management. There's so many different areas. Which processes do you think work better in internal, and which one works better for external, according to your experience so far?
Yeah, I think we try to get the procurement people to focus on the strategic aspects of things, right? So if we can get them focused on what the strategies are and review those on a regular basis and making sure that they're keeping competitive in the marketplace, then a lot of the back office functionality can be outsourced to bring much better value. So whether that's maintaining specs or operate or those kinds of things, or whatever it is, the back office piece of it is oftentimes best outsourced, because then you can number one, keep your internal staff to a minimum, and you can get it over to the people that can bring value quickly and at lower cost. So any time where you can have the chance to do things like maintaining systems or entries or even PO entries and things like that, or following up on POs and expediting and all that kind of stuff, sometimes that can be outsourced, not always, but sometimes it can be. And whenever we see that happen, we know there's great opportunity for value improvement. But it's especially nowadays when there's so many tools available like AI and things like that, where we get the procurement people to focus on the bigger topics, and it's more interesting anyway for them, I think. So AI's got a great role to play there on those more strategic things too.
Perfect. So when you're talking to, CEOs or supply chain leaders in terms of balancing the agility of it all, like the efficiency behind it, the cost saving aspect, what kind of advice do you give them? If you want to tell me one piece of advice that you always share with them.
I think it's really about optionality, right? I think I talked about that before. So I think it's about creating that, what we say, a competitive environment, so that we aren't too comfortable with where we are with things. And we see, the marketing people get really comfortable with who's doing their creative, and the attorneys get really comfortable with who's doing their contracts. And the accounting people get really comfortable with who's doing their tax audit, and it permeates the organization. It's not just the widgets that we buy or the services that we buy. It's everywhere. And so, I think, where we've been really successful in my career is where we've gotten the whole organization to engage. So, and the way I used to sell it was, great, you can hire me to be your VP or whatever of sourcing. That's great, and I can save you, X million dollars. But what if I could teach 10 of your people to each save $2 million, or 20 of your people to save $1 million? And then once they learn that process, then it sets them free to address other parts of the organization. And so we don't just teach procurement people. We want to teach, the people in finance. We want to teach the people in marketing. We want to make that a broader thing. And so if we can open up that organization, so now as a consultant, I get to do some of that training, right? Teach people how to do that. Then you can bring value all across the business, and you don't just rely on the procurement people for it. I think that's really, really important. As I said, skills are really key. So we can teach a lot of these skills to people with the right attitude, right? And the right approach as you move forward. One of the most important things to me and things I'm most proud of in my career, the people I've had some hand in helping develop and have gone on to become sort of senior executives or successful people in their own right. And it's, that's what I most remember, Cynthia, about my career of 40 some years is
Yeah.
those folks that I just had some promoted recently, and you see that, and I didn't do it for them, of course, they did it, but you played some small role in that, some piece of advice that you gave them, some piece
Yeah.
of emotional intelligence that you pointed out to them, a flaw that they have, and if they
Yeah.
could just speak up more. They have great ideas. Speak up more. That's probably the most common advice I get people. But
Yeah.
it's developing people that's so important, and I remember that more than however many $1 million we saved for a given supplier.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm glad that you still kind of have those people kind of reaching out to you with those
Mhm.
information. And likely you said, right? So it's about building the people, it's about building the culture around it. And now we see so many new technologies just coming at us with such a high pace, like, AI, there's digital transformation happening every second. So where do you see us in the next 5 years in procurement and sourcing? Where do you see it going?
Yeah, I think the AI is certainly important, and we're certainly just starting the AI era. I'll have to
Yeah,
pass the torch to some younger folks to carry that through, I'm sure. But number one, I think it's important that you figure out ways to use it every day in your everyday
exactly.
jobs, right?
Yeah,
And that you don't wait on your management to come to you and say, okay, well, now here's our AI system. So number
yeah.
one, you got to figure out how to use it yourself. I think the mistake companies make today is they're not teaching the people how to use AI. So they're not teaching people how to, for example, help build a negotiating strategy. You can ask, a thing to do that, but it's going to give you this generic answer that's pretty sophomoric, frankly, and most of them
Hmm.
that I see. So it requires some input. So you can't just buy like AI software, like an AI sort of ERP system that's got AI functionality. I mean, that's great, but it's more important that you teach your people how to use, how to prompt, how to write the
Hmm.
questions to the technology
Exactly.
so that you get
Yeah.
useful information back, so that you can build a good negotiating strategy, so that you can do the research necessary to prepare for the negotiation, and so you can identify alternate suppliers that are, potentially qualifiable to do that. So I think that's a mistake people make, because they just assume people, because you give them access to Chat GPT, that they know what to do with it. And I find
Exactly.
majority of people don't. They just ask very
Yeah.
simple questions.
Yeah, yeah. It's the way you kind of, write the prompts. I guess that what makes it AI. So I mean, you kind of have to train it, right? That's the whole point of it. But
Yeah.
like you said, there are so many people who are averse to that kind of culture. Like they don't want to change. They don't want the new things to
Mhm.
come in. I would love to hear a moment where you had to kind of come in a place where people were very traditional, but you had to introduce something to them. And how did you overcome that whole first like ickies, like I don't want to do this, get out? What can you share a story with us in something like that?
Yeah, in the consulting world, we see that quite a lot. So what's the right way to say it? So I think most people at least are averse to change, right? So change management's really important to understand the whole change curve that people go through
Yeah.
in the midst of a change. And so you have to have the combination of the skills, augmentation, teaching, education. So you have to provide that, I think. And then I think
Hmm.
you also have to show them why that's important to them. So we
Yeah.
talk a lot about what we call the WIFM, or the what's in it for me, right?
Oh,
So
okay. The phone,
so
that's
we
what you
say,
call
yeah,
it.
what's
Okay.
in it for me? Why do I need to do this? Well, if
Uh-huh.
you can do this, then your negotiation is going to be more successful, because you'll have
Hmm.
thought of all the potential issues, not just the two that came to your mind,
Yeah.
as you prepare for that negotiation. So I think the change initiatives often fail when we don't provide the WIFM and don't
Okay.
show them why it's good for them to do so. And it's not about threatening their job, right? If you don't do this, then we're going to
Yeah.
let go of you. That's not the point. The point is you'll be able to do your job better. You're going to move faster through the organization. You're going to be well respected. Going to
Yeah.
be able to do better and feel better about yourself if
Yeah.
if you can do these things. So the WIFM's the key, I think.
Wow, I learned a new phrase today with them. I'm gonna bring that up with my clients.
Yeah,
What's
that's
in
right.
it for you? So,
That's right.
Steve, this has been such a great conversation, and I don't want this to end because it's been going. I've been learning so many new things, and it's very interesting. And before I let you go, I always ask this one question to all my podcast people: is what was that one thing or three things that you would have taught to your younger self that you have learned now over the 30 plus years in your career that you would want to teach the new generation that's coming in this digital age, I guess, into the supply chain industry, especially procurement?
Yeah, it's not too late for partnerships and working with suppliers. I think that's the most important thing today. Yeah, we do lots of cost savings things that may take costs out, but to really capture that, you need to have a relationship with those suppliers that you selected to go forward, at least on things that aren't just like standard, arm's length office suppliers or whatnot. But you need to be able to build partnerships with people. And AI today doesn't replace that. I don't know about 20 years from now, but today AI can't do that. So, I want to be able to shake someone's hand, look them in the eye while I'm shaking their hand, and talk about how we're going to work together to achieve long-term success in a given area. And I think that's an area of emphasis that seems to be waning a bit as we think about AI and how all the wonderful things that can happen. And it harkens back to the days of the reverse auctions were all the rage. And how fast we were going to do that and save all this money. And it was great for office paper, but it didn't help us on things that had specific qualifications about them, and it didn't build relationships. So we've got to have those people-to-people relationships, and that's what builds. Even if you don't call them partnerships, at least they're a strong relationship, and you rely on each other to help drive costs out of the supply chain.
Yeah. Perfect. And any last thoughts that you would like to share that I wasn't able to cover in my questions with you?
And just a couple of quick ones. One is, for young people that are starting out in supply chain, I encourage you to spend your 20s exploring different areas and different things that may or may not be different companies. That depends on this person's situation. But try different things in your 20s before you get too far into your career and develop too much or have a family and things like that, and make it difficult to do things. So explore things when you're early in your career. Talk to old gray-haired people like me. Regardless of what their job is, even if they're just, maintenance people in the office, learn from people, have an inquisitive mind. And then I think for the old gray-haired people like me that are still scratching out a living, look for opportunities to help young people, to coach, even if you don't have a formal mentoring relationship. But just as you observe and work with people, you can bring great value to people with sort of wizened observations. Of course, they need to be receptive to those, but I think in most cases, most young people are, and you can bring great value. And that's the best thing about my career is the opportunity to bring those kind of wizened observations to people and say, hey, if you just did this a little differently in that, maybe it'll help you. And it is surprising how people can build on that, and sometimes because of mentoring relationships, sometimes not. But if you're young, talk to the old folks. If you're old, talk to the young folks, and that's how we strengthen the organization.
Wow, that was perfect end to this podcast, Steve. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights with us. I learned a lot of new things today, and I hope this was a great experience for you as well. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, great experience. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you again, Steve.